Trump's numbers are pretty locked in. His supporters aren't going anywhere, but he's also not gaining any new supporters.
Now, millions of Americans tuned in to watch the Trump versus Harris debate last night. Donald Trump, well, his assessment was that it was his best ever debate, but the consensus among political analysts is that actually Kamala Harris was the better performer. But what about the voters? In the end, they are all that matters here. Let's talk to US pollster Roshni Nedungadi, who is a partner at public opinion data and analysis firm HIT or HIT Strategies. Roshni, hello, good afternoon from us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
So, what are people saying in the States this morning, your time?
Yes, I think the consensus from voters and from political experts around the country is that Kamala Harris handily won that debate, and in fact came off looking incredibly presidential and credentialing herself, which is exactly what she needed to do.
But do you think she'll have done enough with those people who quite genuinely don't know which way to turn?
Yes, that's a great question. I think pre-debate, we had seen some polling that indicated that undecided voters really wanted to hear more about her. Um, Trump's numbers consistently throughout the last year or so have been really baked in. He's not gaining any supporters, and he's not really losing any supporters either. The thing that people want to hear about, undecided voters particularly, is Harris's plan. In a recent New York Times Siena poll, 31% of voters said that they wanted to hear more about her and her plans, compared to just 12% who said that they needed to hear more about Trump. Um, the economy and immigration were two of the issues that they cited that they wanted to hear more about. And according to the Washington Post this morning, that looked at kind of their speaking times and who was talking more and who was
Mm.
attacking more, she did talk more about her plans on the economy and on immigration, while also managing to attack Donald Trump's plans on the economy and immigration.
Yeah.
And she created a clear contrast between his plans as well.
I was really intrigued as well by the contrast in their styles in that split screen format. I don't know what you thought of this, but Kamala Harris was quite often smiling quite gently, occasionally looking quizzical, sometimes putting her hand to her chin. She was engaging with what Donald Trump was saying. He didn't seem that involved himself.
No, and it was interesting. He didn't seem to be making eye contact or even looking at her throughout the debate. He looked quite rattled. He looked like he was playing defense, and he just didn't seem to be very comfortable in the environment. Whereas she looked like she was much more comfortable. She had an air of the president and confidence, and was making eye contact and talking to him directly
And
as well.
actually, right at the start, Roshni, it was so. We were just talking about it here in the studio, looking at images of what happened last night, our time. And it was Kamala Harris who crossed the floor to shake his hand. She was going to be that person. Clearly, this was something they decided. It didn't look as though Donald Trump was going to move towards her, though.
No, and I particularly like that she introduced herself to him and said her name,
Yeah.
Kamala Harris. He has been mispronouncing her name pretty consistently in his rallies and on the news, and so I think that this was a really important point for her to make to him.
Yeah, I think he responded. I've listened to it a few times to try to find out what it was he said. I think he said "have fun" to her, which in all fairness is a relatively affable thing for him to have said in the circumstances.
It is, and she did at times look like she was having fun in that debate. She is a lawyer. She's used to these kinds of situations, and
Mm.
I think that came out last night.
Yeah, it did strike me that there were times when Kamala Harris was properly having to introduce herself to the American people, talking about her upbringing, making it very clear that she's someone who does know about how ordinary lives are lived. And it really did make it clear that there will be some people who engaged with that debate last night who truly knew nothing about the woman.
Yeah, and that's what we had heard from voters pretty consistently through the last couple of months. Even before Biden stepped down, they wanted to hear more about her. They didn't know what she was about, what she has been doing as vice president, what her policy positions were. So I think it was really incumbent on her to introduce herself to those voters. I think she also set up a really clear contrast that she is the fighter for the people and has made her career fighting for the people of America. And she pointed out that if the American people were to listen to Donald Trump's rallies, they would never, ever hear him talk about them or what he can do for them. And so she set up a very clear contrast there
Yeah.
for folks who haven't heard about her.
And she also set up some traps for him, which he obliged her by falling into and absolutely going with it. But I think we do have to acknowledge that there were some things that she didn't fully explain. And had she been debating with someone who, frankly, was a bit better, she might have been challenged. She didn't really answer the question at all, the very first question she was asked, about whether Americans feel better off now than they did when Donald Trump was in charge.
Yes, and I think she was just getting her sea legs under her a little bit, but she did go on in the rest of the debate to describe her views on the economy and what she and President Biden have been doing to improve the economy, as well as her plans for building up the middle class, creating tax cuts for the middle class, ensuring healthcare costs are decreased, ensuring that the cost of living is decreased. So I think maybe while she didn't address it immediately in that first question, she did get back to it and describe to the American people what her plan to strengthen the economy was.
Okay, so maybe it was because our expectations of the vice president's performance were quite low. She seems to have come out of this rather well. But do we know whether there's been a proper impact yet on the polling and on voter intentions?
I think it's a little hard to tell at this point. It's still early in the day. Hopefully, we'll see some polling numbers come out throughout the afternoon. But debates typically don't have that much effect on our polling numbers in this country. And I think, especially in this current environment, we didn't even see that much movement in polling numbers overall post Biden Trump debate. Like I said previously, Trump's numbers are pretty locked in. His supporters aren't going anywhere, but he's also not gaining any new supporters. So it'll be really interesting to see shifts on some of our undecided
Mm.
numbers, whether the undecided voters are moving or choosing whether they're going to go vote and who they're going to go vote for after this
And I
debate.
guess that is where the intervention of Taylor Swift comes in because her younger fan base, some of whom won't be registered to vote, will have paid attention to her endorsement. And do you think they really will start taking an interest now?
You know, it was very well timed. After her endorsement in 2018 in the Tennessee Senate race, vote.org, which is a voter registration website, saw 65,000 new voter registration submissions across the country, and many of these were from young voters and young women. We saw just in the last hour of the debate last night, Democrats had the best hour of fundraising ever. They raised $9 million in that last hour. In the hour after Swift's endorsement, which take it with a grain of salt because it also came after a wildly successful debate, but Democrats bested their best hour of fundraising and they raised $13 million. So a lot going on there. I think Swift has the opportunity to bring in some young voters who were on the fence, who had not heard yet what they needed to from the different candidates and create this kind of coalition for young voters and for young women.
Okay, so here we are on September the 11th, quite a long way to go still. And as far as we know, no further debates in prospect. Or do you think there might be another one?
It's hard to see why Trump or his team would agree to another debate. But we are looking forward to the vice presidential debate coming up between Tim Walz and JD Vance.
When's that?
I believe it is in October, though I'm not sure exactly what date.
Okay, well, we'll certainly look ahead to that here on Times Radio. Really appreciate your time, Roshni. Thank you very much indeed. That's Roshni Nedungadi, who's a partner at public opinion data and analysis company Hit Strategies.